The Alabama twin sisters, who shared one male slave between them, until they both got pregnant. On March 14, 1849, the county courthouse in Lowndes County, Alabama, burned to the ground in what officials called an unfortunate accident caused by an overturned lamp. But among the ashes, investigators found something that didn't match the official story. 3 sets of human remains in the basement, chained to iron rings embedded in the stone walls. The county clerk's records from 1847 to 1849 were completely destroyed, along with property deeds, marriage certificates, and most crucially, the probate documents for the Sutton estate. For over a century, descendants of Lawton County families have whispered about what really happened at Bell River Plantation during those 2 years, about the twin daughters of Colonel Nathaniel Sutton, and about the slave named Marcus, who somehow managed to document everything before he vanished. What you're about to hear has been pieced together from surviving letters, medical records from Mobile, and testimonies given to a Northern Abolitionist society that were sealed until 1963. Before we continue with the story of the Sutton sisters and the secrets that consumed an entire community, make sure you're subscribed to Echoes of the Past and hit that notification bell. We uncover the darkest corners of American history that textbooks won't touch. And leave a comment telling us what state or city you're listening from. We love knowing where our audience discovers these forgotten horrors. The truth about Bell River Plantation begins not with the fire, but with a funeral 2 years earlier, and with 2 women who had been taught that survival meant absolute control. Lowndes County in 1847 stretched across some of the richest cotton-growing soil in Alabama, black earth that made men wealthy and carved the landscape into kingdoms of white columned houses, surrounded by fields that reached the horizon. The county seat of Hantville sat at the center of it all, a collection of brick buildings and dirt streets where planters conducted business, and their wives pretended not to know where the family wealth truly came from. Bell River Plantation lay 8 miles south of town, accessible only by a private road that wound through stands of water oak and across 2 tributaries of the Alabama River. Colonel Nathaniel Sutton had built the main house in 1828, a 3-story structure with 12 rooms and a separate kitchen building connected by a covered walkway. The slave quarters, 24 cabins arranged in 2 precise rows, sat a quarter mile behind the main house, close enough to be summoned quickly, far enough that the colonel didn't have to hear the sounds of the lives he owned. The colonel had made his fortune in cotton, but his reputation came from something else entirely. He'd served in the Creek War under Andrew Jackson, and brought back from that conflict a belief that humans could be improved through careful breeding, the same way one improved livestock. His library contained medical texts from Philadelphia, agricultural journals from Virginia, and personal correspondence with men at universities who shared his convictions about racial hierarchies and biological destiny. He kept meticulous records, measurements, observations, genealogies traced back 3 generations. His neighbors called him eccentric, but brilliant. His slaves called him something else entirely, though never where white ears could hear. The colonel never married. Instead, he'd purchased a slave woman named Ruth in 1824 from a Charleston trader, a woman described in the bill of sale as of uncommonly fair complexion and genteel bearing. Ruth gave birth to twin daughters in 1825, Sarah and Catherine. The colonel raised them in the main house, educated them with tutors from Mobile, dressed them in fine clothes ordered from New Orleans, but he never freed them. He never acknowledged them as his daughters in any legal document. On paper, they remained his property, an arrangement that gave him absolute authority over every aspect of their existence. Sarah and Catherine grew up in a peculiar isolation. They learned to read and write, to paint watercolors and play the pianoforte. They studied literature and mathematics, geography and French, but they rarely left the plantation grounds. The colonel controlled who visited and when, screening every potential social contact through his own rigid criteria. He told them they were special, that they had been given advantages that elevated them above their station, but that the world beyond Bell River would never understand or accept them. He taught them that safety came from seclusion, that trust was a weakness, and that power, however limited, was the only currency that mattered.
The twins learned these lessons too well. They developed their own language of glances and gestures, finishing each other's sentences, sometimes falling silent for days and communicating only through notes passed across the dinner table.
They wore identical dresses in coordinating colors, Sarah in deep green, Catherine in midnight blue. They read the same books at the same pace, one starting at the front, one at the back, meeting in the middle. They shared everything: hairbrushes, jewelry, secrets, and eventually something darker. Their mother, Ruth, died in 1839, officially from pneumonia, though the slave quarters whispered about bruises on her arms and fear in her eyes during her final weeks. After her death, the colonel's control over his daughters tightened like a noose. He installed locks on their bedroom doors that could only be opened from the outside. He required them to submit weekly written reports on their activities, their thoughts, their dreams. He began testing them, leaving valuables in obvious places to see if they would steal, introducing them to male visitors to observe their reactions, creating situations designed to reveal any hidden rebellions. The plantation itself prospered through these years. By 1847, the colonel owned 63 enslaved people, whose labor produced 142 bales of cotton annually. He sold his crop through factors in Mobile and invested the profits in more land, more slaves, more books for his ever-growing library. The slave population at Belle River had an unusual demographic profile, a disproportionate number of light-skinned individuals, more children than the birth rate should have produced, and a disturbing pattern of families separated and sold away just as children reached adolescence. The overseer, a man named Jonas Pritchett, had worked at Belle River for 15 years. He lived in a cottage near the slave quarters and carried out the colonel's orders with mechanical precision. Pritchett kept his own records, punishment logs, work assignments, dietary restrictions for slaves the colonel had designated for his breeding program. These notebooks, written in Pritchett's cramped handwriting, documented atrocities with the casual tone of farming reports. Which women were forced into which cabins, which children were sired by which men, which pregnancies were terminated, and by what methods. In the main house, Sarah and Catherine understood more than their father realized. They read his journals when he traveled to Mobile on business. They listened at doors and gathered fragments of conversations between Pritchett and the colonel. They knew what happened in the quarters after dark, knew which of the slaves were their half-siblings, knew that their father viewed human beings as experimental subjects in his personal laboratory of racial theory, and they learned to hate him with a cold, patient fury that would have terrified him if he'd recognized it. The morning of February 3rd, 1847 arrived with unseasonable warmth, temperatures climbing into the low 60s even before noon. Colonel Sutton had spent the previous evening in his study, working by lamplight on correspondence with a professor at the Medical College of South Carolina.